The clock reads 4:45 in the morning. In the Polish port city of Wielun, families are still asleep. Children are tucked into beds. Bakers are beginning their first loaves of the day. The streets hold the particular quiet that only exists in those final hours before dawn. A stillness that feels, in retrospect, like the world holding its breath. Then, the sky breaks open. German Heinkel He 111 bombers arrive without warning, without declaration, without mercy. The first bombs fall at 4:40 a.m., 5 minutes before the official military operation even begins. The hospital, clearly marked with a red cross, is among the first buildings to collapse. 70% of Wielun is reduced to rubble within hours. Over 1,000 civilians are dead before most of Europe has finished breakfast. There is no siren loud enough for what is coming. No border guard, no diplomatic cable, no frantic telephone call to Warsaw can outrun what is already in the air. Because what descends on Poland on the morning of September 1st, 1939, is not merely an army. It is the violent beginning of the most catastrophic conflict in human history. A war that will consume 6 years, every continent, and over 70 million lives. This is not a story that begins gently. It does not ease you in. It arrives the way it arrived for the people of Poland, without warning, from all directions, with overwhelming force. This is the story of September 1, 1939. To understand why the world shattered on that Friday morning, we have to step back, not decades, but years. Because the road to Poland's invasion was paved with broken promises, political cowardice, ideological obsession, and a dangerous miscalculation about the nature of Adolf Hitler. The First World War had ended in 1918 with the Treaty of Versailles, a peace agreement that many in Germany experienced not as a resolution, but as a humiliation. Germany lost territory, its military was crippled by restrictions, and it was forced to accept sole responsibility for the war under the infamous war guilt clause. Reparations were crushing, national pride was shattered. Into that wound stepped a former Austrian corporal with a gift for rage, a talent for theater, and a vision of German supremacy that was absolute, consuming, and genocidal in its foundations. Adolf Hitler rose to the chancellorship of Germany in January 1933. Within months, the architecture of democracy had been dismantled. By 1935, Germany was openly rearming in violation of Versailles. By 1936, German troops had marched into the Rhineland, a demilitarized zone under the treaty, and the Western powers did nothing. The pattern had begun. Hitler would push, the world would hesitate, and Hitler would push again. In March 1938, Germany annexed Austria in what became known as the Anschluss. Crowds in Vienna cheered. The map of Europe shifted. Again, Britain and France protested and acquiesced. Then came the Sudetenland, the German-speaking region of Czechoslovakia, which Hitler claimed was his final territorial demand. At Munich in September 1938, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain and French Premier Édouard Daladier met with Hitler and Mussolini and agreed to hand him the Sudetenland without even inviting Czechoslovakia to the table. Chamberlain returned to London waving a piece of paper, declaring peace for our time. He was wrong. Hitler had already decided what came next. In March 1939, German forces occupied the remainder of Czechoslovakia, violating every assurance Hitler had made at Munich. The policy of appeasement, the strategy of giving an aggressor what he wants in exchange for peace, had collapsed in spectacular, irreversible failure. Britain and France finally understood. There was no satisfying this man, there was only stopping him. And so, on March 31st, 1939, Britain issued a guarantee of Polish independence. France followed. If Germany attacked Poland, Britain and France would declare war. It was the line in the sand that diplomacy had desperately needed years earlier. But the question now was whether Hitler believed it. He did not. Poland in 1939 was a nation reborn. For over a century, it had been erased from the map, partitioned and absorbed by Russia, Prussia, and Austria. The Treaty of Versailles had restored it, including a strip of territory known as the Polish Corridor, which connected Poland to the Baltic Sea, but physically separated East Prussia from the rest of Germany. In the corridor sat the city of Danzig, a majority German-speaking city, administered by the League of Nations as a free city, coveted by Hitler, and central to his demands on Warsaw. Hitler wanted Danzig returned to Germany. He wanted highway and rail access across the Polish corridor. The Polish government of Foreign Minister Józef Beck refused. Poland had seen what accommodation had done for Czechoslovakia. Poland would not yield. Behind the scenes, however, something far more sinister was being arranged. On August 23, 1939, the world woke to news that left Western capitals stunned. Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union had signed a non-aggression pact, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Two ideological enemies, two systems supposedly locked in mortal opposition, had shaken hands. The public agreement pledged neutrality between the two powers, but the secret protocol, not revealed to the world for decades, divided Eastern Europe into German and Soviet spheres of influence. Poland was to be split between them. Its fate had been decided in Moscow and Berlin, without a single Polish voice in the room. With the Soviet Union neutralized, Hitler's eastern flank was secure. He could attack Poland without fear of a two-front war. The final obstacle had been removed. German military planners had been preparing full Weiss, case white, the invasion of Poland, since April. Over 1.5 million German soldiers were positioned along Poland's borders, in Germany, in Slovakia, and in the former Czech territories now under German control. 60 divisions, over 2,700 tanks, nearly 2,000 aircraft. Poland was to be surrounded and overwhelmed before its allies could respond. On August 31, 1939, German SS operatives staged a false flag attack on a German radio station in Gliwice, near the Polish border. They dressed concentration camp prisoners in Polish uniforms, murdered them, and left their bodies as evidence of a Polish attack on German soil. It was a fabrication so crude, so cynical, that it barely required belief, only justification. Hitler needed a pretext, however transparent. This was it. If you are watching this documentary and feeling the weight of these events, the broken treaties, the ignored warnings, the fateful choices, we invite you to stay with us, because what comes next, on the morning of September 1st, is the moment everything changed. The German order was given. At 4:45 a.m. on September 1st, 1939, though some units had already begun firing minutes earlier, the full force of the German war machine crossed into Poland. The invasion came from three directions simultaneously: from the north through East Prussia, from the west through Germany itself, and from the south through Slovakia. The tactic employed was something the world had never seen at this scale. The Germans called it Blitzkrieg, lightning war. It was not simply about speed, though speed was essential. It was about the precise coordination of multiple forces to shatter an enemy's ability to think, respond, and function as a coherent unit. Armored columns, panzers, punched through defensive lines before infantry even arrived. Close air support demolished any counterattack before it could organize. Communication lines were cut, supply chains were severed. The psychological effect was as devastating as the physical destruction. Polish commanders found themselves receiving orders that were already obsolete, responding to front lines that had already moved, directing reserves toward positions that no longer existed. The Polish army fought with extraordinary courage and with what it had. The cavalry, often mythologized in later decades as charging tanks with lances, a story that is largely exaggerated, was in fact a professional, modern fighting force used for reconnaissance and rapid infantry deployment. Polish soldiers defended fortified positions tenaciously. They launched counterattacks that, in places, briefly stabilized lines. The Battle of Mokra on September 1st saw the Wołodzyńska Cavalry Brigade hold off the German 4th Panzer Division for an entire day, a remarkable tactical achievement against overwhelming odds. But remarkable achievements could not change the arithmetic of the situation. Poland was outgunned, outmaneuvered, and, critically, fighting alone on two fronts before September was even a week old. The Luftwaffe targeted military installations, bridges, railways, and roads. It also targeted civilians. The bombing of Wielun on that first morning set a precedent that would define the entire conflict. In this war, There would be no safe distinction between the battlefield and the home front. The terror from the sky was deliberate. Refugees clogging the roads were strafed by German aircraft. The psychological collapse of civilian populations was a military objective, not collateral damage. In Warsaw, the Polish capital, air raid sirens screamed within hours of the invasion beginning. Citizens filled the streets in confusion, some carrying children, some clutching documents, some simply standing and staring at the sky, trying to understand what was happening to their world. Polish radio broadcast a message. The country was at war. President Ignacy Mościcki addressed the nation. The Polish army would defend every inch of Polish soil. In London and Paris, telephones rang through the night. Ambassadors were summoned. Emergency cabinet sessions were called. The British and French governments had issued a guarantee of Polish independence, and now the moment of reckoning had arrived. Were they prepared to honor it? The answer came in the form of ultimatums delivered to Berlin. Britain and France demanded the immediate withdrawal of German forces from Poland. The deadline passed. Hitler did not respond. He did not need to. He had gambled that the Western democracies would hesitate, as they always had before. This time he was wrong. At 11:15 a.m. on September 3, 1939, 2 days and hours after the invasion began, Neville Chamberlain addressed the British nation by radio in a voice heavy with exhaustion and sorrow. He had tried, he said, everything in his power to preserve peace. He had failed. And so, as of 11 a.m. that morning, Britain was in a state of war with Germany. France followed hours later, declaring war at 5 p.m. The Second World War had begun. If this documentary is helping you feel the full weight of this history, consider subscribing and continuing with us, because this story is only just beginning. The declaration of war changed everything, and yet, for Poland, it changed almost nothing immediately. British and French forces did not storm across the German border on September 3rd. No massive relief offensive was launched to draw German divisions away from the east. The French did conduct a limited probing advance into the German Saarland region beginning September 7th, a cautious, tentative movement that penetrated only a few miles into German territory before halting entirely and eventually withdrawing. It was the only significant Western military action of those first weeks. Poland had been promised support. What it received was sympathy. The reasons were both strategic and psychological. France and Britain needed time to mobilize. Their military establishments were built for a different kind of war, the slow, entrenched, artillery-grinding warfare of 1914 to 1918. They had not yet internalized what Germany had already demonstrated in Poland, that modern war moved at a speed that rendered traditional mobilization timelines dangerously obsolete. While Allied generals studied maps and waited for logistics to align, Poland burned. On the ground inside Poland, the situation deteriorated with horrifying speed. By September 5th, German forces had broken through the primary Polish defensive lines along the western frontier. The industrial region of Silesia was in German hands. The city of Łódź, Poland's second-largest manufacturing center, was threatened. Polish Supreme Commander Edward Rydz-Śmigły ordered a general withdrawal towards southeastern Poland, toward the Romanian bridgehead, a region near the Romanian border where Polish forces could potentially regroup, resupply through Romania, and hold out until Allied intervention materialized. It was a desperate plan, but it was not yet an impossible one. The Polish army was still fighting. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers were moving, repositioning, regrouping. In the north, Polish forces around the Modlin fortress held firm. In the south, the Kraków army retreated in reasonable order. There were moments, briefly, where the outcome felt uncertain, where determined Polish resistance created openings, where German supply lines stretched thin, where the sheer ferocity of Polish defense slowed the relentless German advance. Then came September 17th, and with it, the blow that extinguished hope. At dawn on that morning, Soviet forces crossed Poland's eastern border in massive numbers. Over 500,000 troops advancing on a front, stretching from the Pripyat marshes to the Carpathian Mountains. The Soviet Union, honoring the secret clauses of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, had stabbed Poland in the back at its most vulnerable moment. Moscow justified the invasion with the claim that it was protecting Ukrainian and Belarusian minorities in eastern Poland, a justification so transparently cynical that even some Soviet officials found it difficult to deliver with conviction. For Poland, the military calculus was now mathematically final. Squeezed from the west by Germany and from the east by the Soviet Union, with no relief from the south or north, the Romanian bridgehead plan collapsed. Polish Commander-in-Chief Rydz Śmigły ordered remaining forces to avoid pitched battles with Soviet troops and instead attempt to cross into Romania and Hungary, where soldiers could eventually make their way to France and continue the fight. Tens of thousands did exactly that, escaping, regrouping, and eventually forming Polish units that would fight with extraordinary distinction in France, in the Battle of Britain, in North Africa, and at Monte Cassino. The spirit of Polish resistance did not die on September 17th. It relocated, it endured, it fought on. But Poland itself, as a functioning state, as an independent nation, was finished for the foreseeable future. Warsaw held out longer than almost anyone expected. The capital had been under aerial bombardment since the first day of the invasion. Its civilian population had endured weeks of destruction, yet the city's defenders, soldiers and civilians alike, refused to surrender. They built barricades, they dug anti-tank ditches. Ordinary men and women carried ammunition, tended the wounded, extinguished fires with buckets of sand, while bombs fell around them. The mayor of Warsaw, Stefan Starzyński, broadcast daily radio addresses that became legendary for their calm dignity in the face of catastrophe. His voice became the voice of a city that would not yet accept what was being done to it. The German siege intensified. On September 25th, a day that Poles would later call Black Monday, the Luftwaffe launched its most devastating assault on Warsaw yet. Over 1,150 bombing sorties in a single day, incendiary bombs designed to start fires that overwhelmed any capacity to respond. The city's water system had already been destroyed. Firefighters had nothing with which to fight the flames. Entire neighborhoods were reduced to ash. Warsaw surrendered on September 28, 1939. The formal capitulation was signed as fires still burned across the city. The last organized Polish military resistance ended on October 6th, when a 17,000-man force under General Franciszek Kleberg surrendered after the Battle of Kock, the final engagement of the September campaign. By that point, it had been 35 days since the bombers first appeared over Wielun. 35 days from a nation at peace to a nation extinguished. Pause here for a moment. Consider what 35 days means. In 35 days, a country that had existed for over 1,000 years, that had been erased once before and had clawed its way back into existence, was overrun and partitioned between two totalitarian powers. In 35 days, over 60,000 Polish soldiers were killed in combat, with another 130,000 wounded. Nearly 700,000 Polish troops were taken prisoner by Germany. The Soviet Union captured another 250,000. In 35 days, the civilian death toll was already catastrophic, with estimates of over 60,000 Polish civilians killed in the campaign itself, before the systematic atrocities of occupation had even fully begun. And the occupation that followed was among the most brutal in the history of modern warfare. Germany and the Soviet Union formally partitioned Poland on September 28th, the same day Warsaw surrendered. Germany annexed the western regions of Poland outright, incorporating them into the Reich. The central portion became the general government, a territory not formally part of Germany, but ruled by German authority, with a specific and deliberate purpose: the exploitation and destruction of the Polish people. The Soviet Union absorbed the eastern territories, deporting hundreds of thousands of Polish citizens deep into Siberia and Central Asia. German authorities in occupied Poland immediately began systematic campaigns against Polish leadership. Intellectuals, professors, priests, doctors, lawyers, and military officers were targeted for arrest and execution. Operation AB, Außerordentliche Befriedungsaktion, or Extraordinary Pacification, was a deliberate effort to eliminate the educated classes of Polish society, to decapitate the cultural and intellectual foundations of the nation. Poland was not simply to be conquered. It was, in the Nazi imagination, to be unmade. And for Poland's Jewish population, 3 million people, the largest Jewish community in Europe, September 1939 marked the beginning of a persecution that would systematically escalate over the following years into the machinery of genocide. The concentration camps established on Polish soil, the ghettos established in Polish cities, the final, industrial horror of the Holocaust. All of it begins, in its territorial context, with the invasion of September 1, 1939. This weight must be felt, not processed quickly, felt. If you have stayed with this documentary to this point, you understand something that cannot be conveyed through a simple list of dates and battles. You understand the texture of this catastrophe, how it began before sunrise with bombs falling on a hospital, how it unfolded through weeks of desperate resistance, how it ended with a great nation partitioned between two empires that had, weeks earlier, shaken hands over its grave. We ask you now, if this history matters to you, if you believe these stories must continue to be told with the seriousness they deserve, to subscribe to this channel. There is so much more of this history to explore. Every date we have touched today contains within it another documentary, another city, another soldier, another family, another choice that changed everything. Back in Berlin, in the immediate aftermath of the Polish campaign, the German military drew its own conclusions. The Blitzkrieg had performed beyond the most optimistic projections. Poland had been defeated faster than even the German General Staff had planned. The Wehrmacht had learned, refined, and validated an entirely new way of waging war, one built on speed, combined arms coordination, and the deliberate targeting of an enemy's ability to command and respond, rather than simply its ability to fight. These lessons would be applied 7 months later with devastating effect in Western Europe, when Germany turned its attention to France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. The fall of France in June 1940, a nation that had withstood 4 years of German assault in the First World War, took just 6 weeks. The shadow of Poland was present in every armored column that raced through the Ardennes. In Britain, the fall of Poland and the subsequent months of relative quiet on the Western Front, the period historians would call the Phony War, created a dangerous complacency that was shattered decisively in the spring of 1940. Winston Churchill, who had warned about Hitler's intentions for years, while Chamberlain pursued appeasement, became Prime Minister in May 1940. His ascent was a direct consequence of the catastrophic failure of the policies that had allowed Germany to grow, expand, and ultimately begin a world war. The invasion of Poland also transformed the strategic calculations of every major power on Earth. The United States, officially neutral in September 1939, watched the speed of Poland's collapse with alarm. President Franklin Roosevelt, understanding that American isolationism had limits, began working to support Britain and France in ways that stopped short of direct military engagement. The Soviet Union, having taken eastern Poland as its share of the bargain, observed German military capacity with calculations of its own, calculations that would prove fatally miscalibrated when Germany turned east in June 1941 and the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact became worthless paper. Japan, watching its German ally demonstrate the vulnerability of established empires to fast, decisive military strikes, drew its own lessons about what was possible in the Pacific. The chain of consequences set in motion on September 1, 1939, would eventually reach Pearl Harbor, the Pacific Islands, the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It would reach the beaches of Normandy and the ruins of Stalingrad. It would reach the gates of Auschwitz. Every theater of the Second World War connects, through a chain of cause and consequence, to that Friday morning when the bombers appeared over a sleeping Polish city. September 1, 1939, is one of those dates in human history that divides time. Before it, a particular world existed, imperfect, tense, threatened, but still intact. After it, that world was gone. The Europe that emerged from 6 years of total war bore almost no resemblance to the Europe that had existed before the bombs fell on Wielun. Borders were redrawn, empires dissolved, Millions of people were dead. The political architecture of the entire planet was reorganized around the consequences of what began that morning. But history is not made only by generals and statesmen. It is made in the moments lived by ordinary people, in the paths of extraordinary events. It is made in the terrified sprint of a Warsaw family toward a cellar as bombs fall. It is made in the decision of a Polish cavalry officer to mount his horse and ride toward an armored column because there is nothing else to do. It is made in the voice of a mayor broadcasting calm into a burning city because someone must. It is made in the choice of a young Polish soldier to escape across the mountains into Hungary, to reach France, to keep fighting because the idea of Poland is worth more than the safety of surrender. These people, unnamed in most histories, uncelebrated in most monuments, are the true substance of September 1st, 1939. Their courage did not prevent the catastrophe, but it bore witness to something essential about human dignity under conditions designed to extinguish it entirely. And that is why we remember, not to celebrate war, not to glorify destruction, but to understand, with full clarity, what happens when the world fails to confront evil early enough, and what it costs, in human lives and human suffering, to confront it later. September 1st, 1939, is the answer to the question, what does the beginning of the worst war in history look like? It looks like a clear late summer sky over Poland. It looks like bombers without warning. It looks like a hospital reduced to rubble before the sun has fully risen. And it sounds like sirens that came too late. Thank you for watching. If this documentary moved you, informed you, or gave you a deeper understanding of how the Second World War began, please subscribe and leave a comment below. History this significant deserves to be remembered, fully, honestly, and with the weight it carries. We will continue telling these stories. We hope you will continue watching.